What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast, aka JT Sports Live. I'm your host, JT. I really apologize for the late start. I had to finish picking up the rest of my schedule for college for the fall semester, so that kind of pushed back the time that I wanted to start the live stream. But you know what they say, better late than never. On this episode, we're going to be discussing why the Cleveland Browns are the NFL's biggest mystery going into this year. Is playoff a bust for Dennis Allen and the New Orleans Saints? And will the New York Giants miss the playoffs this season? If you haven't already, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel, like the live stream, also share it on all of your social media platforms with your friends, family members, and acquaintances. We go live every day at 5 p.m. Eastern time, Monday through Friday. Also, make sure that you check out the JT Sports Podcast, available on all podcasting platforms: Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts from. You can find the JT Sports Podcast. The Cleveland Browns are a really weird team to get a read on going into this year. You look at the talent they have one of the best rosters in the NFL. You have a top 10 offensive line. You have an elite secondary. Deshaun Watson, he looked a little rusty when he was coming back from that lengthy suspension that he had to serve. And this is a team that I think is good enough to compete for a Super Bowl, but also they have a good possibility of winning only 7 to 8 games this year. Like, this is a really weird team. Deshaun Watson, I still believe that he's one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. I still will consider him to be a top 10 quarterback. I'm not going to let one rusty season define him. You got to remember that he didn't play the majority of last year, so when he came back, of course, he was going to be a little rusty, trying to get the chemistry and timing down pat with his new teammates. I do expect him to bounce back in a major way this year. You have Kareem Hunt, who's gone, but he's going to be replaced by Jerome Ford, who's going to be backing up Nick Chubb. I believe that Jerome Ford is going to have a really good season for the Cleveland Browns behind Nick Chubb. At wide receiver, you have Amari Cooper. You traded for Elijah Moore. You also have a young rookie who I'm really high on, and Cedric Tillman, who I had a first-round grade on coming out of this past year's draft. And this defense, when you look at the secondary, is one of the best in the NFL. When you talk about top 10 cornerbacks, I don't think Denzel Ward gets brought up enough in that conversation. Like, this guy is the definition of lockdown. Then you have Juan Thornhill, who you're going to be bringing in at free safety, which was a weakness for you last year. The concerns that I have with the Browns mainly lies with the coaching. I'm not a big believer in Kevin Stefanski. This dude, after 2020, his coaching kind of got worse. And you can say, well, he had Baker Mayfield at quarterback who regressed the season after, which is understandable. And then last year, you had to wait for Deshaun Watson to get done with that suspension so he could come on the field and play for you. But this is a make or break year for Kevin Stefanski. If the Browns don't make it to the postseason, there's a very high chance that Kevin Stefanski ends up getting fired after this season is over. This Browns team is really talented. They're loaded at almost every single position. You bring in new defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz, who is one of the better defensive minds in the game. And earlier, he talked about how he wanted to be able to rotate guys in and out on the interior defensive line, which explains why they spent a lot of money on the interior defensive line, such as bringing in Tristan Hill, Maurice Hurst. You give Jalin Tomlinson a really big contract, and then you trade for Zadarius Smith, who's going to be another good option rushing the quarterback on the opposite side of Myles Garrett. I don't really know about the linebacker position outside of JOK, but it's not like you need fantastic linebacker play in order to have a great defense. It's just that the run defense for the Browns has to be way better than what it was last season. And you look at this division. This is the toughest division in the NFL. You have the Baltimore Ravens and the Cincinnati Bengals, who both are pretty much premier Super Bowl contenders. Then you have the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have one of the better young rosters in the NFL. The Cleveland Browns, they haven't finished above Pittsburgh in this division in the last 3 decades? I can't remember the last time the Cleveland Browns finished above Pittsburgh in the NFC North. And with this division being so close together in talent, I mean, there's not really a large transparency between the Ravens, the Bengals, the Steelers, and the Browns. They're just about at neck and neck in terms of roster composition and the talent that they have. You probably can say that the Browns have a better team than Pittsburgh, but Pittsburgh still has the best coach in this division, and Mike Tomlin. And I think coaching may be the reason why Cleveland ends up not being able to make it to the playoffs this year. Like, let's just be honest. Kevin Stefanski hasn't really proven much as a head coach in the NFL outside of his first year with this organization. So the jury is still out on Kevin Stefanski and how good of a coach he actually is. And for this year, you have no more excuse if you're Kevin Stefanski. Your defensive coordinator is now set. You have Deshaun Watson, who's going to be playing for the whole entire season, week 1 to week 17. So if the Cleveland Browns don't make it to the postseason this year, man, I don't really know if Kevin Stefanski ends up returning next year. And if you're a Browns fan, you have every reason to expect this team to not only make it to the playoffs, but to make a deep playoff run as well. This is a team who you probably could consider being a dark horse Super Bowl contender. I've been talking with my guy Juice, and he's been saying how the Browns are one of the most underrated teams going into this NFL season. And I definitely understand why. The talent is there at every single position. There's not really too many significant holes that the Browns have. They have tons of depth on the offensive line. They got guys who can get it done at receiver for Deshaun Watson. You have your franchise guy. You have an elite secondary. You have Myles Garrett, one of the best defensive players in the league. And now you're going to give him some additional help by trading for Darius Smith. There is absolutely zero excuses for Kevin Stefanski this year to not have the Cleveland Browns playing in the postseason this year. Their schedule is pretty tough given the fact that they're playing in one of the hardest divisions in the NFL. But if we're judging the Cleveland Browns based on a talent standpoint, they have one of the top 10 most talented rosters in the league going into this season. For the Cleveland Browns, this is a really hard team to get a read on. Their floor is 7 to 8 wins, and their ceiling possibly could be AFC Conference Championship, potentially the Super Bowl. That's how weird it is when you're trying to evaluate this Cleveland Browns team. The talent's there, but you don't know if the coaching is going to be there. And even if you have a talented team, if you don't have a good coach, especially in a division that's this tough, like the AFC North, you're not really going to go too far. So if Cleveland doesn't make it to the playoffs, I don't think it's going to be because they don't have the talent, but I think it's going to be more of an indication that Kevin Stefanski isn't the guy. So the Cleveland Browns, man, this is the NFL's biggest mystery team going into this season. You don't really know what the hell this team is going to do. They could win 7 games, or they could go to the AFC Championship and possibly the Super Bowl. It's really hard to get a read on the Cleveland Browns going into the 2023 NFL season. The New Orleans Saints, man, they're also a team that has some pretty high expectations. This was a franchise last year that moved on from Sean Payton. Well, they had to move on from Sean Payton because he ended up retiring. And Dennis Allen, in his first season as the head coach for the Saints, he kind of disappointed. Yeah, they had some significant injuries. Michael Thomas, once again, wasn't able to stay healthy. They had some injuries on the offensive line that forced them to have to move some guys around. But when you look at how weak the NFC South was last year, there was no reason why the New Orleans Saints shouldn't have missed out on the playoffs. I mean, Tom Brady was on his last leg. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense was a disaster. Todd Bowles proved to everybody why he's not head coach material. And going into this year, you have Derek Carr at quarterback. So you move on from Andy Dalton. You bring back Jameis Winston to be the backup. Derek Carr may not be considered an elite quarterback in a lot of people's eyes, but he's way better than what the Saints had at quarterback last year. And you probably could say that Pete Carmichael and this Saints coaching staff severely mismanaged New Orleans quarterback situation last year. Andy Dalton was too inconsistent with taking care of the football. He also had a tendency to hold on to the football too long. And Jameis Winston, even when he was healthy, the guy still was a turnover machine, just like how he was when he was back playing with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So you got Derek Carr, somebody who should give you pretty consistent quarterback play, somebody who should take pretty good care of the football, and the team that you have around Derek Carr is probably the best supporting cast that he's had in his whole entire NFL career. You're throwing to Chris Olave, who was the second best rookie wideout last year, behind Garrett Wilson. You got Rashid Shaheed, who also had a really good rookie year. Michael Thomas. I mean, hopefully this guy can stay healthy. I mean, this guy hasn't had a full healthy season since his all-pro year back in 2019. And I think for Michael Thomas, there's only so many years that you can keep on getting injured. I think eventually you have to be able to stay healthy for a good length of the year. Even if the Saints aren't able to get Michael Thomas playing in all 17 games, you pray to God that he can at least play for a good stretch of the season, at least 11 to 12 games. That's all you're asking for if you're a Saints fan. Like, Jesus, man, like Michael Thomas, can you please stay healthy? Please. With Michael Thomas on the field, New Orleans has one of the best receiving corps in the NFL. Now, we don't know what's going on with Alvin Kamara and his legal situation. I was reading a couple of reports earlier today, and his legal situation right now doesn't look all that good. There's a high possibility that Alvin Kamara misses a couple of games this year for the Saints, but they did pay Jamal Williams a good amount of money in free agency. Plus, you have Kendre Miller, rookie running back who you drafted out of TCU. I think your run game is going to be fine. Your main concern is going to be the offensive line. Now, this offensive line, they underperformed last year. They dealt with some injuries. They had to move some guys around. But with everybody coming back fully healthy, there's no reason why this offensive line should perform the way that it did last year. And Pete Carmichael, as a play caller, he doesn't look like he was all that great prior to when Sean Payton was on the coaching staff. When Sean Payton was on the coaching staff, this man, Pete Carmichael, he looked like the next great play caller at OC for New Orleans. And then Sean Payton ends up retiring, and Pete Carmichael kind of forgets how to call plays and how to properly run the offense. Like, I don't know what the hell went on with the Saints offense last year. Injuries aside, this team severely underperformed. And this year, with everything that they bring in, you bring in Derek Carr, you're still going to have an elite defense. This defense last year carried New Orleans on his back for pretty much the whole entire year. And then you had Andy Dalton turning the football over at a pretty high rate. You didn't want to start Jameis Winston, although he was the better option. So this offense didn't help this defense out at all. And this defense, although in my opinion this was an elite unit, they struggled at times getting off the field on third down and at forcing takeaways. This was one of the teams in the NFL that struggled to produce turnovers. Not just that, but against the run, they were pretty average. But they do have a really good pass rush. They have one of the most talented secondaries in the NFL. You got Marshawn Lattimore, Paulson Adebo at cornerback, Marcus May and the Honey Badger manning your safety spots this year. And in this division, you're going to be having the best QB in the NFC South. Tampa Bay is either going to be starting Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask. Have you not seen what they've been doing so far throughout OTAs for Tampa Bay? It's been god-awful. They overthrowing wide-open receivers, and they're running routes on air. And then you have Carolina, who could be a little interesting with Bryce Young and Frank Wright. They did make a lot of improvements over the course of this offseason with the moves that they made in free agency and how well they drafted. But with a rookie quarterback, despite how great Bryce Young may be, there's always going to be some growing pains with that. And then for the Atlanta Falcons, do you really trust Desmond Ridder? I mean, Falcons fans make it seem like Desmond Ridder is just destined to improve. And last year when we saw Desmond Ridder play, the dude didn't really have any flashes or any big moments that made you say, oh yeah, Desmond Ridder is going to be our guy to lead us to the promised land. If you're New Orleans, this is probably the best chance you're going to have at winning the NFC South. And to be honest with you, there's no reason why New Orleans should have won this division. This season falls on the shoulders mostly of Dennis Allen. The talent's there. Hopefully everybody can stay healthy on the offensive line. The defense, is still going to be really good. Takeaways is something that you can't really practice and you can't really control. Some years you're going to have a lot of takeaways. Other years you're not going to have too many. But overall, when you're looking at this team from a talent standpoint, this without a doubt is the most talented roster in the NFC South. I mean, you're loaded at receiver. Even if Michael Thomas ends up going down, you're not too bad because you still do have Olave and Shaheed. And you're going to have the best QB in this division and Derek Carr. So there's no reason why the New Orleans Saints shouldn't make it to the postseason. Dennis Allen is going into a year where it's playoff or bust. When Sean Payton retired and Dennis Allen ended up becoming the head coach of New Orleans, they retained basically the whole entire coaching staff. This is pretty much the same group of guys that Dennis Allen has that was with Sean Payton throughout his whole entire tenure as the head coach when he was in the NOLA. So for Dennis Allen, man, if the Saints can't make it to the postseason this year, like Kevin Stefanski, this is going to be an indication that he's not head coach material. And Dennis Allen doesn't even have a winning record as a head coach. I was really surprised when Dennis Allen was announced the head coach of the Saints. But Sean Payton, when he went on the herd with Colin Cowherd, he said that Dennis Allen, he still believes in him. He feels like the way that last year went was mostly due to injuries. So I'm going to put my faith in Sean Payton and believe that Dennis Allen is going to be able to get this thing turned around. But a lot of issues that the Saints kind of had were kind of on the coaching staff. Mismanaging the quarterback situation. There's no reason why you should be having Andy Dalton out there. You should have went with Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston was the guy who probably gave you the best chance to win. Plus, this is the younger option at QB. Andy Dalton is more of a backup option at this point. And even when Andy Dalton was in the game, he wasn't no better than Jameis Winston. He was still throwing pick sixes and throwing interceptions. So what really was the difference between Andy Dalton and Jameis Winston? And moving on to this year, if you are somebody who is a doubter of the New Orleans Saints, and let's say you're a Falcons, Panthers, or Bucks fan, and you're looking to play devil's advocate for why New Orleans can't win this division, you're probably going to say, well, Derek Carr, you saw how last year went with the Las Vegas Raiders. How do you know if that's just not the quarterback that Derek Carr is now, despite having a better supporting cast? Then you do have a pretty fair argument. Like I mentioned earlier at the start of this segment, Derek Carr isn't known to be a top 10 quarterback. And even though he can give you elite quarterback play at times, is not consistent, and plus in big games, he doesn't really come through all too often. Last year, he wasn't really in a good system with Josh McDaniels. Him and Josh McDaniels just weren't a good fit. But at the end of the day, though, Derek Carr has not really proven to be a quarterback that can elevate a team. Derek Carr has to have a good supporting cast around him in order for him to be effective. And if the New Orleans Saints have to battle through injuries this year on the offensive line and that receiver like how they did last year, Derek Carr potentially could struggle. They also paid Derek Carr a pretty hefty contract. And I was just a little bit surprised at how much Derek Carr was making. I know that the quarterback market is getting oversaturated and these QB contracts just seem to get bigger and bigger. You got guys like Daniel Jones making big money and Derek Carr making big money, and these guys aren't even considered to be elite QBs. So for Derek Carr, if things aren't going right and the play calling isn't good and guys can't stay healthy up front, New Orleans could end up struggling this year. But for the most part, if I had to bet my money on the Saints making it to the postseason, I have a lot of confidence that they would be able to do so. I was talking to a Saints fan in the barbershop a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying that he believes that this team is good enough to not only make it to the playoffs, but maybe win a playoff game or two. And I said, whoa, like, I think you're drinking a little bit too much of the Kool-Aid, but this team most definitely does have enough talent to not only win this division, but to make it to the postseason and maybe win a wild card game. But there's also a strong possibility that this team disappoints. Dennis Allen, once again, doesn't have a winning record as a head coach, and he hasn't proven that he knows how to coach a winning football team. There were times last season when this team looked undisciplined. They looked like they were getting out-coached at times. And you can put it all on the quarterback position and the injuries on the offensive line all you want to, but you were playing in the worst division in the NFL in the NFC South. New Orleans going into last year kind of was my pick to maybe win this division potentially outside of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I had the Saints making it into the postseason. I think I had them at 9-10 wins. So last year for them to only win 7 games was a major disappointment despite the injuries. I mean, if Carolina could win 7 games and almost win this division with an interim head coach and with Sam Darnold at QB, you mean to tell me that New Orleans couldn't have did the same with Dennis Allen having a somewhat better roster than what Carolina had last season? 2023, is playoffs or bust for Dennis Allen and the New Orleans Saints organization. If New Orleans doesn't make it to the postseason this year, if you're general manager Mickey Loomis, you're going to have to sit Dennis Allen aside after the year is over, and you're going to have some tough conversations. And those tough conversations may end up in Mickey Loomis having to give Dennis Allen the pink slip. Dennis Allen is a head coach who hasn't proven to know how to coach a winning football team. He had a losing record when he was the head coach of the Oakland Raiders, and he still has a losing record with the New Orleans Saints. And yes, this is a way better situation than he ever had with the Oakland Raiders, but there were times last year where this team just let games get away from them at times. And this coaching staff, without Sean Payton, they kind of forgot how to be good coaches. I was thinking that Pete Carmichael was going to be one of the best OCs in the NFL last year. And at times, the dude didn't look all that good calling the plays. So this season is a big year for the New Orleans Saints. Dennis Allen has to prove that he can get this team to the postseason, and he has to be able to prove that he can coach a winning football team. There's no excuses anymore. You got a proven QB in Derek Carr, who's solid at best. He can give you good top 11, top 12 QB play, but he's the best QB in this division. I know that's not saying much because this is the NFC South, and there's not really any other good QBs in this division that can even come close to saying that they're as good as Derek Carr, at least at this moment. So for New Orleans, when you have the best quarterback in the division, that gives you a huge advantage. Not just that, but your defense is still going to be really stout. Your only concern, if you're a Saints fan, has to be Dennis Allen as your head coach. How much belief do you have in Dennis Allen being able to get the Saints into the playoffs in 2023? If this team isn't playing in the postseason, I think you're going to have to look at Dennis Allen if you're Mickey Loomis, and you're going to have to shake his hand. You're going to have to say, we appreciate everything that you've done for this organization, but we got to move on. The last thing that I want to talk about are the New York Giants. Last season, we already know that the Giants were the NFL's biggest Cinderella story. They won enough games to get into the playoffs, going 9-7-1. They upset the Minnesota Vikings in the wild card round, even though many people would tell you that that wasn't an upset. But I didn't expect the Giants to win that game against Minnesota. Daniel Jones barred out. Yeah, they got dismantled and shredded by the Philadelphia Eagles, but for the most part, the New York Giants severely overachieved last year. I mean, they had a guy named Isaiah Hodgins snapping that wide receiver against Patrick freaking Peterson, bruh. Like, how many of you guys knew who the hell Isaiah Hodgins was prior to last season? Not too many, because this was somebody who came off another team's practice squad and just started going off out of nowhere. And then Daniel Jones, he got paid a lot of money this offseason. And I'm a little bit skeptical about Daniel Jones. I'm not going to say I'm a doubter of Daniel Jones, but I'm still not a believer in Daniel Jones. So I don't really know what that makes me. I'm not a believer. I'm not a doubter. I'm still in wait and see mode with Daniel Jones. The Giants did get better this offseason, though. Okay, you trade for Darren Waller. You signed Parris Campbell in free agency. You also were able to get wide receiver Jalin Hyatt, the speedster, out of Tennessee. You got a fantastic rookie center and John Michael Smith. I was watching the New York Giants YouTube vlog that they had on draft day when they were trying to figure out if they were going to be able to get John Michael Smith and Jalin Hyatt, and they ended up walking away with both. So the general manager was really thrilled with that. Brian Daboll was really happy with that. It just seems like the whole entire New York Giants organization is really thrilled with the acquisitions that they made over the course of this offseason. But when I look at this roster, though, I still kind of question if the Giants are going to be able to repeat the success that they had last year in 2023. This division got better. Philadelphia, yeah, they lost a couple of coaches. They lost some key players in free agency, but they did a fantastic job at drafting those replacements. Not just in this past year's draft, but in the previous year's draft. And then you have Jalin Hyatt, who was a premier MVP candidate. He was the runner-up behind the guy who won MVP last year. So for the Philadelphia Eagles, you know they're going to be there. The Dallas Cowboys are most definitely going to be there with Dan Quinn as their defensive coordinator. Yeah, Mike McCarthy made a change at OC, but the Dallas Cowboys still have one of the better rosters in the whole entire NFC conference. And then you have the Washington Commanders, and this is where New York Giants fans are probably about to click off the video, or you're about to comment something really angry in the comment section, but the Washington Commanders, they have Eric Bieniemy as their offensive coordinator now. You may not be a big believer in Sam Howell, but you should at least have a little bit of faith in Eric Bieniemy. I mean, people on ESPN, FS1, a lot of people in the national media go to war for Eric Bieniemy being head coach material. And if Eric Bieniemy is as good as a coach as people make him out to be, if he ends up working out for the Washington Commanders and this offense ends up improving and it's way better this season than what it was last season, plus you think about the fact that Washington had a top 10 defense last season, Washington, without a doubt, is going to be a lock for the playoffs. No ifs, ands, and buts about it. Their wide receiving core, Curtis Samuel, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, is better than the Giants. I was going back and forth with a Giants fan in the comment section of a previous video that I had uploaded not too long ago. He was like, man, the Giants have a way better receiving core than the Washington Commanders. Do you really? I mean, Parris Campbell had a okay season last year, but that was the most productive season of his whole entire career. He's been in the NFL for what, 4 to 5 years? You got Wan'Dale Robinson coming back, who I really like a lot. But you got Darius Slayton, who is okay at times, but he also has a huge issue with having concentration drops in the biggest moments of games. And then you have Isaiah Hodgins. I mean, this dude was snapping last season. I mean, I call him the Patrick Peterson destroyer because all he does is just make Patrick Peterson look like a bum. But are you really confident that your wide receiving core is going to be dynamic enough to be able to put points on some of the NFL's best defenses this year, which all reside in this division? That's something that a lot of New York Giants fans never talk about. Yeah, you were able to scheme your way to the playoffs last season, but now with the division increasing in competition, with more talent and better coaches getting added, such as Eric Bieniemy to the Commander's staff, I mean, there's a really strong chance that the New York Giants don't make it to the postseason. JT, we got Darren Waller though, man. He's one of the best tight ends in the game. Hell yeah, Darren Waller is one of the best tight ends in the NFL when he's healthy. Darren Waller is 30-something years old and hasn't played in a full season since 2020. So can you trust him to stay healthy? I mean, I don't like to speculate about injuries because you never can predict when injuries will or won't happen. But you also have to know that there's a high probability that a guy like Darren Waller, who's been injury prone for the last 2 years, has a high risk of getting injured again. The New York Giants, offensively, do they have enough talent to be able to win enough games against some of the top defenses in the NFL, which all kind of reside in the NFC East? Washington had the top 10 defense last year. That's probably not going to change. If anything, their defense should get better now that they're going to have an offense that can be efficient and can sustain drives. You know, Philadelphia's defense is still going to be good despite losing their defensive coordinator, Jonathan Gannon. But it seems like a lot of Eagles players and a lot of Eagles fans make it seem like Jonathan Gannon wasn't even that good of a DC. The guy struggled to make adjustments in the Super Bowl. He struggled to make adjustments in big games at times. So many people don't even view him as a significant loss. I mean, they lost their offensive coordinator, Shane Steichen, but this offense, let's just keep it a stack. It's not going to have a severe drop-off because they lost their OC. This is still one of the most talented offenses in the NFL. Same thing with the Dallas Cowboys. When you look at their roster, they only got better. Trading for Brandon Cooks, their defense even got better. Trading for Stephon Gilmore. For the New York Giants, if you're a Giants fan, put your bias aside. Do you really believe that these receivers, Isaiah Hodgins, Parris Campbell, Darius Slayton, are going to be able to be productive against Stephon Gilmore, Trayvon Diggs, James Bradbury, and Darius Slay? I mean, even Washington has a really good secondary with a phenomenal pass rush. I mean, you got Saquon Barkley still, who is one of the best running backs in the game. He's a weapon. But how many elite weapons do you have on this offense? Darren Waller, he's good when he's on the field, but can you trust him to stay healthy? This is somebody who hasn't played in a full season in 2 going on 3 years. It's a reason why the Raiders were willing to part ways with Darren Waller for the compensation that they got in return, which pretty much was a bag of chips and a flat soda. I'm not saying that I'm doubting the New York Giants. I believe that they have a really good chance of returning to the postseason, but I also have my reservations about the Giants because they didn't really add any truly elite playmakers to this offense aside from Darren Waller, who has proven to be unable to stay healthy over the course of 2 years. And you guys already know how I feel about Daniel Jones. The guy won a playoff game. He deserved to get paid. But is this going to be a quarterback who can lead you back to the promised land, given the fact that the NFC East has 3 of the NFL's best defenses? And I do say best with strong emphasis. Washington, Philadelphia, and the Dallas Cowboys, all 3 had some of the best defenses in the NFL in 2022. And that most likely is not going to change this season. If you're the New York Giants and you're a Giants fan, you kind of have to look at your weapons, the playmakers that you have, and compare that to the rest of the division. The New York Giants kind of still have the worst roster in the NFC East. The only difference between the Commanders this season and last season is that the Commanders didn't really have the quarterback situation figured out. You can push back and say, man, JT, Sam Howell ain't shit, man. Like, he hasn't proven anything. The guy only won one game at his debut against the Dallas Cowboys. Like, the jury's still out on him. Yes, it is. But one thing that a lot of people fail to recognize is the importance of good coaching. And if Eric Bieniemy is as good as a coach as people make him out to be, the Commanders' offense is going to improve, and Sam Howell is going to have a good season. And if this offense ends up improving with how good that defense was last year, it's only going to get better if the offense improves. So therefore, Washington has a playoff spot. You know, the Cowboys are probably going to have a playoff spot. And we already know that Philadelphia is as close to a lock as what you get. If you're the New York Giants, you could win 8-9 games and maybe possibly still miss out on the postseason. Maybe. But this division is that tough. Yeah, you got better, and Giants fans are going to say, man, JT, we got a better team this season than what we got last year. Yes, you do. But you kind of fail to realize that you're not the only team that got better. This is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. I know we got off to a late start. I apologize for that. Had to pick my classes for my fall schedule. But we'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Remember, you can catch the JT Sports Podcast every day, Monday to Friday, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Also, make sure that you listen to the podcast available on all podcasting platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from. You can find the JT Sports Podcast. Rate us 5 stars if you enjoyed this episode. Share the podcast with your friends, family members, and acquaintances. And I will see you guys tomorrow with another episode of JT Sports Live.